The problem of evil is the single greatest challenge to the Christian belief in an all-loving God. In the Bible, the origins of evil are generally seen in the story where Adam and Eve disobey God in the Garden of Eden. The cycle of stories concerning creation and flood is a reworking of older Babylonian myths in the New Testament. St. Paul argued that the sin of Adam and Eve is made up for by the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. The Bible does not see evil as something outside God. God creates both good and evil, although in no senses is evil in God. To some extent, in the New Testament, evil is personified as Satan, and Revelation depicts a final war between the forces of God and those of Satan, although Satan is not seen as equal in power to God. Evil is categorized as natural and moral, and these give rise to the logical and evidential problems of evil. The logical problem of evil is expressed by the inconsistent triad. The evidential problem of evil is formed, 1, by the sheer extent of evil in the world, including pointless evils, and 2, by God's omniscience, because at the point of creation, God must have been aware of the full extent of evil. The problem of the extent of evil is best illustrated by Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, where the public prosecutor even alleges that even accepting that God's purposes are good does not excuse the sufferings of innocent children. Despite the extent of evil in the world, we can still accept that some suffering is good. For example, the pain of surgery can restore the body to health, and suffering can bring about the best aspects of the human character. The options. Aside from denying one of the statements in the logical problem of evil, answers to these problems include the idea that freedom is a higher order good that is worth the evil it brings, and the idea that at some stage it will be shown that the whole process is worth even the worst evils. The first of these ideas is expressed in the free will defense, and the second by Hicks' veil of soul-making theodicy. The Christian free will defense argues that God is justified in allowing evil to exist in the universe because evil is needed to allow humans to understand and prefer the good. John Mackey describes the Christian free will defense as a matrix of first, second, and third order goods and evils, but rejects it on the grounds that it must have been logically possible for God to create the entire human race so that everybody would make free and good choices. Because God has not done so, Mackey concludes that either God is not omnipotent, or else he does not exist. In either event, the free will defense is logically incoherent. In response to Mackey, had God created everybody so that they always made free, good choices, good would be meaningless because it would have no frame of reference. Moreover, it would be logically impossible for God to create genuinely free people who would always make good choices, and it has no limitation of God's power to say that he cannot do the logically impossible because that is not a sensible idea. Alvin Plantinga rejects Mackey's claims that the Christian free will defense is logically incoherent. Plantinga argues that evil exists because of two morally sufficient reasons. MSR 1 deals with moral evil and claims that God's creation of persons with morally significant free will is something of tremendous value. God could not eliminate much of the evil and suffering in this world without thereby eliminating the greater good of having created persons with free will with whom he could have relationships and who are able to love one another and do good deeds. MSR 2 deals with natural evil and says that God allowed natural evil to enter the world as part of Adam and Eve's punishment for their sin in the Garden of Eden. However unlikely this is, it is logically possible, so in summary, Plantinga therefore defeats Mackey's claim that the Christian free will defense is logically incoherent. Evaluating the free will defense. The argument is strong because Mackey's claims can be refuted. It would be logically impossible for God to create the kind of world that Mackey thinks God should have created. The free will defense can also explain why natural evils are allowed to happen. They produce second-order goods such as love, sympathy, and compassion, so they do bring about a greater good. The free will defense also establishes the crucial principle that a world with free creatures is more valuable than a world without them, and this is why God allows evil to exist. It is also true that humans value the risk of pain. Where there is no risk, there is no achievement. However, the free will defense has several weaknesses. Plantinga's defense is logically coherent, but it's not necessarily true. Plantinga's explanation of natural evil is particularly weak. Moreover, his defense relies on libertarian account of free will, which cannot be shown to be true. In particular, the free will defense has no convincing response to the evidential problem of evil. John Hick's veil of soul-making theodicy has the harder task of trying to give an explanation of evil which is probably true. Hick rejects Augustine's theodicy and argues that humans are made for a love relationship with God. Hick describes this as a two-step process in which humans are created in the image of God and through experiencing hardship and suffering move towards the likeness of God, by which he means the perfect personal life of humans are seen in Jesus. The world is not a place of soul deciding, as in Augustine's account, where many go to hell. Rather, it is a place of soul making, since all will be saved and enter heaven. Accomplishing this relationship with God can only be achieved by each individual being free to choose between good and evil. And in turn, there has to be an epistemic distance between God and humanity. Humans cannot be certain that God exists, otherwise their freedom would be compromised. Evaluating Hick's theodicy. The epistemic distance is a powerful argument to justify any kind of evil and suffering. His soul-making argument is also powerful. Souls cannot be made without challenge and suffering, and great goods cannot be achieved without experience of great evils. Hick's rejection of the idea of hell also seems coherent, since he says hell alone would constitute the worst part of the problem of evil. Hick incorporates evolution into his theodicy as the first stage of human development, which fits well with the scientific evidence about human origins. There are several weaknesses in Hick's theodicy. For example, 1. It does not solve the problem of unfair animal suffering, since their suffering does not benefit from the animals. 2. Its ends do not justify the means. Humans have never had the opportunity to consent to God's plans. 3. Hick does not solve the evidential problem of evil. Is the promise of heaven really enough to make up for the sheer amount of suffering in the world? 4. His theodicy does not match up to some Christian teachings. For example, what was the point of Jesus' crucifixion? Griffin's process theology rejects the key doctrines of creation out of nothing and of God's omnipotence. The relationship between God and the universe is panastatic. The universe exists within God and God exists within the universe. Just as humans are embodied souls, God is the soul of the universe, so the mind of God experiences literally everything that happens. God and the universe exist eternally. So God's act of creation was not to create the universe out of nothing, but to organize already existing chaotic matter. And since chaotic matter can resist God's will, God cannot be omnipotent and cannot get rid of evil. Evil is not from God, but within God. Evil is one aspect of the physical and mental processes of the universe, all of which God experiences. God's actions are therefore restricted to persuasion, exerted over long periods of time. God persuades chaotic matter, such as electrons, atoms, and molecules, into more complex forms, to form stars, galaxies, and eventually ourselves. Nowhere in this process does the idea of a direct/miraculous intervention arise. The evidential problem of evil, therefore, does not arise, because God cannot intervene to prevent evil. All there is the long process of persuasion. The problem of evil arises because every increase in the capacity for enjoyment and good is matched by an equal capacity for suffering and evil. Moreover, with beings like ourselves, increased complexity brings about a far greater ability to oppose God's will, and is an increased power to influence others towards greater evil also. Why then did God not abandon the drive to complexity? Griffin's answer is that God not to have brought about the possibility of evil would have been a worse evil than any evil we have so far experienced. So God was right to take the risk. Moreover, the universe is in God, so God shares every instance of pain and suffering in the universe. So he is the fellow sufferer who understands. Evaluating Griffin's process theology. It seems more realistic than other theodicies because it abandons the belief in God's omnipotence. The reason we see so much evil is that God cannot control it. On the other hand, Griffin's argument has 4 major problems. First, is a non-omnipotent God worthy of worship? Second, despite the claim that it would have been evil for God to have not brought about good, would God really be justified in starting a process he could not control? Third, Griffin admits that victory against evil is not guaranteed, so why should we join God in the fight against it? Fourth, most process theologians believe in objective immortality. People survive only in the sense that they exist forever as part of God's memories. Do you think this is satisfactory? Theodicies do influence Christians greatly in ways in which they lead their lives. For example, Those who follow Augustine's soul-making theodicy make every effort to live by the moral rules of Christianity in order to avoid hell and have the hope of heaven. Protestant groups who live by the rule of Scripture will do the same. Many individual Christians follow the example of Job. They abandon philosophy for faith, holding that God must be accounted righteous regardless of what evils happen. Although, as with Job, protest to God is acceptable. It is right to protest about something you believe in to be unjust. Some take a practical approach through prayer and intercession, and by service to those who suffer. Some reject all philosophical theodicies and lose their faith, and this was true particularly after moral evil in First World War and the natural evils of influence of a pandemic that followed it. Conversely, the experience of intense evil can bring about more radical versions of Christianity, such as millenarianism. For example, millenarian groups emerged in southern Africa and elsewhere after the 1918 to 1920 influenza pandemic. Millenarianism groups can actually be encouraged by increased evils on earth because they take it as a sign of impending final battle between good and evil described in the book of Revelation.